Okay, I've started.
All right. Thank you, Henrietta. Good afternoon and welcome to this webinar. And thank you all for joining us today. We are here to discuss the regulatory challenge raised by the growing presence of distributed energy resources in African power systems and what this means for utilities, regulators, and DR owners themselves. Here, when we refer to distributed energy resources or DERs, we mean generation such as rooftop solar, storage, flexible demands that are connected to the distribution network or located behind the customer meter. And that change the traditional patterns of electricity supply, system operation, utility revenues, and cost recovery. Uh, from a regulatory point of view, DERs raise two closely linked questions. The first can be taken as institutional, and that is what happens to utilities in a system where customers are no longer only consumers, but also producers and providers of some other electricity services. And the second issue is regulatory. And this is how should rate design and regulatory frameworks evolve to ensure fairness, cost recovery, and system sustainability in the presence of DERs. These questions are inseparable. How regulators design tariffs and allocate costs will shape the future of utilities, and how utilities evolve will determine which regulatory options are more realistic. Today's discussion builds on analytical work that was conducted by the African School of Regulation and Sustainable Energy Africa in partnership with Get Transform on this particular topic on rate design in systems with distributed energy resources. So before we proceed, a few housekeeping notes. This is a moderated discussion, and even though it's a moderated one, we very much welcome audience participation. The audience, you can submit questions or comments at any time using the chat function, and we will bring them to the discussion forum as time allows, or one of our panelists might also respond to those questions in writing in the chat room. The session is being recorded, as my colleague has already pointed out, and insights from today's discussions will inform follow-up capacity building initiatives. We will begin with a short opening intervention from our partner, Get Transform. As we all know, Get Transform supports African governments and regulators to design and implement practical power sector reforms with a strong focus on tariffs, utility sustainability, and the integration of new technologies, amongst other things. It is my pleasure to invite Mr. Lucas Curtin, who is advisor on both on and off-grid regulation and market development at Get Transform, to share a brief perspective on today's session. Mr. Lucas, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Kino. And yeah, good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome also from my side. I'm very happy to have the chance to speak shortly also to you and even display the cooperation, as Kino was already mentioning, between us, Get Transform, the ASR, and also SEA. And yeah, to quickly introduce me, my name is Lucas Kürten, and as also Kino was already mentioning, I'm advisor on on-grid and off-grid regulation and market development at Get Transform. And I also would like to give you a very quick glimpse on our project before diving into the topic of the webinar. So Get Transform, also as you can see above me, is a European funded program that supports partner countries in sub-Saharan African countries and Latin America in advancing energy sector transformation through policy, regulatory, and institutional reforms. So we work closely with ministries, also as mentioned, regulators, utilities, and system operators to help translate energy transition ambitions into practical and implementable frameworks. Under this, one area where this transition has become especially urgent is the distributed generation and distributed energy resources, such as across different African countries, the whole continent actually, where DERs are reshaping electricity systems and where rooftop solar, commercial and industrial self-generation, behind the meter storage and hybrid systems are expanding rapidly, often faster actually than the regulatory and utility frameworks can adapt. In many countries, distributed solar has become one of the fastest growing sources of capacity, driven by rising tariffs, unreliable supply, and sharply falling technology costs on the other side, which is also a good trend. Through Get Transform's work on distributed generation integration, we see this reality actually very clearly through our DG Policy Catalyst window, one of our flagship initiatives that we do, and which is detached to our general work on our country windows or in our country windows, which we realize together with SEA and other regional partners. We supported regulators and utilities in several African countries to respond to the rapid growth of DG by creating rules to make it safe, predictable, and system compatible. Our experiences highlight actually two insights. The first one would be that DERs can unlock real value when properly integrated. They improve reliability for businesses, reduce diesel dependence, and can support economic activity. For example, in one of our cases where we worked at in Mozambique, in Madagascar and Kenya, for instance, where clearing regulatory bottlenecks actually has directly enabled new commercial and industrial DG capacities to come online. And second, without clear regulatory frameworks, DERs can create serious challenges. This is also what I think will be discussed later, because uncoordinated connections raise concerns around grid stability, safety, hosting capacity, for instance. And at the same time, many utilities are already under financial pressure, and traditional tariff models do struggle to recover network costs as sales volumes decline. So this brings us directly also to the focus of today's webinar, since traditional utility models were built for a world of one-way power flows and passive consumers. DERs fundamentally changed actually this logic. Energy and capacity can now come from many distributed actors. And as the webinar's title actually puts this very clearly, the question is no longer whether the utility business models must change, but how it can actually adapt or even thrive, ideally, hopefully, in a decentralized system. So from our work in Get Transform, one message stands out quite big. And this is not, or this message actually is that not primarily the challenge would be on the technology side of things, but a regulatory, financial, and institutional one. So tariffs, remuneration frameworks, and utility roles need to evolve to reflect a multi-actor system while remaining fair, transparent, and financially sustainable. So this is exactly what today's session sheds light on. As you saw also in the agenda, the following presentation will frame the state of play on DERs and their implications for utilities, and the subsequent panel discussion will then tackle some of the most critical questions that you also in the audience might have. From our perspective, again, from GetTransform, well-designed regulation can turn DERs from perceived threat into a system asset, but only if certain questions are addressed deliberately and also early on, which is very important. And yeah, with that, I came to the end, and I'm very pleased to now hand over back to my colleagues from ASR and afterwards also SIA to take us deep into the discussion. And I would like to say again, thank you very much for having me. And yeah, I wish us all a very nice and good webinar. Thanks a lot, Kino.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lucas, for those opening remarks. Now let's proceed to the next point, and to anchor our discussion in current realities, we will now hear a short presentation on the state of DERs in Africa. So I'm pleased to welcome Mr. Zibusiso from Sustainable Energy Africa to share key insights and observations from across the continent. Zibusiso, you may proceed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kino, and thank you to the ASR for organizing this beautiful knowledge sharing webinar. Welcome to everyone and all the colleagues. I'm just going to share my screen, and then I'll get confirmation if you can see it. All right, there we go. Could you please confirm, Kino, if you can see my screen?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Okoya. So I'll just present in brief about the status of DERs in Africa. And as Kino has rightly pointed out, it is good sometimes to see what's going on the ground, the reality that most regulators and utilities are living in. I think it's going to anchor our discussion in helping us to chart forward perhaps ideas and a path that could directly address our needs. So in this presentation, we're going to just quickly have a brief overview of what's currently happening with DERs in the African region. See how best to move this thing. All right, there we go. So the map that you see on your screen shows in megawatt peak the imported solar in Africa from China from July 2024 to June 2025. And it's divided by country. I think in the slide that will follow, you'll see some of the trends that you're going to see here. But in total, from July 2024 to June 2025, which is a year period, Africa imported 15,032 megawatts of solar panels from China. Of course, this data set does not make a distinction as to how those panels are used within the countries, for example, if it goes to utility scale IPP projects or if it's for own consumption, but it tells a very beautiful story and one that cannot be ignored. When you compare the data on utility projects that are going on from the Global Energy Monitor versus this data set by Ember, you'd see that there is a significant amount of megawatts that is not yet accounted for. So 25 African countries imported at least 100 megawatts of solar panels from July 2024 to about June 2025. That's 25 African countries. And these total imports were up 60% from the preceding 12 months. And the reason is that solar PV is the most common, cheapest form of DER technology that we have today. I'll just maybe go through some trend analysis so that you can pretty much see up until December 2025 what's happening in the solar space in Africa. So Ember runs a database where they update solar imports from China, and I think I'm specifying that these are from China, and to show that because we import solar panels from everywhere, but those from China are relatively cheaper, it means the amount of megawatt peaks that have been imported far supersede the stats that we have, because this is only from one source. So as you can see, the blue line from 2017, we imported about 1,200 megawatts. But as you go along the years, the trend has been an upward climb. And the sole reason, or maybe the strongest reason for this increase in imports is the fact that solar is quickly becoming cheaper and cheaper. So the green line on your screen shows you the cost to import a single watt in US dollars. So from 2017, it was about 35 cents. And in 2025, it's about 10 cents to import a single watt of solar. So the prices continue to go down as technology becomes more efficient, and also as other needs continue to drive our demand for electricity, or at least our demand for reliable solar. We're most likely going to see these imports rising and rising. So I did some just brief analysis on this graph, and I'm just going to show you some things that make me smile that I like to do in my spare time. In between 2023 and 2021, we imported 3 times more solar. I mean, in 2023, we imported 3 times more solar than we did in 2021. And then in 2024, we imported again 3 times more solar as Africa than we did in 2022. And then finally, in 2025, we imported twice as much solar as we did in that single year alone than we did in 2023. So bare minimum, Africa in 2025 imported about 18 gigawatts of solar capacity in terms of solar panels. And this is exactly what is happening on the ground. So the reason why I'm sharing this is just to drive home the point that we cannot ignore the revolution that is happening. You'll see in the other slides when we discuss that this revolution is happening more than anything organically. And because it's going to happen, it is great that we position ourselves as regulators and utilities to be in a space where we can deal with the influx of distributed generation, or DERs, or DPV, or embedded generation quite effectively. So having spoken, there's a select number of African countries for which we have data in terms of the DER penetration as a percentage of the maximum demand of that specific country. So I'll not go through all the countries one by one. I think you can look at your country first and then look at your neighbors, or whichever one that you like. But I'll share a few key things about the data that you see on the screen. The first is that these penetration levels have happened mostly over the last 5 to 6 years. If you go back more than 5 years ago, you would not see these kind of penetration levels. But in over the 5 to 6 years that have just recently passed, solar has skyrocketed. Distributed generation specifically has skyrocketed, right? And this has happened largely without financial incentives. And this seems to follow a trend that we see in some mature markets like the United States of America, California, as an example, and also Southern Australia, for example. So most of these embedded generation, or DERs, are complemented by battery storage in some markets. For example, in South Africa, there's a high rate of attachment with batteries, and also in Zimbabwe, there's a high rate of attachment with batteries. And I think the primary reason why there's lots of batteries in some of these markets is because customers need reliable power, and batteries offer that reliable power. So this also has consequences, or is something that cannot be ignored by the utility. And we're going to see that maybe in our discussion as to why we need to think about it deeply. And just to put these into perspective, these penetration levels as a share of national capacity are similar to what we see in developed markets. So we are not that far behind if you look at everything within context. So what this simply means is that if you can have, for example, in Namibia, about 97 megawatts of embedded generation, these are all systems that are below half a megawatt. So it's 500 kilowatts and below. When they're all summed up, primarily for self-consumption, they make about 97 megawatts, which is about 15% of Namibia's maximum demand. It means that for the country, when it plans or its generation mix, it cannot ignore distributed energy resources. What that means then is that the regulators, working hand in hand with the utilities, need to think about this quite specifically. We'll take a closer look at South Africa. There's a graph that I'm sharing with you here that was sourced from Eskom and the CSIR. It just shows distributed PV, or embedded generation, from 2020 up until 2025. And it compares it with some utility scale PV and utility scale wind and concentrated solar power. You'd see that from 2020 when we started, DPV did not really make up that much of installed capacity. There wasn't much of installed capacity, and it was quite low as compared to utility scale PV and also utility scale wind. But as the years progressed, you see it shooting all the way to cross the 7 gigawatt mark. And this is something that means a lot to a country such as South Africa, and the municipalities who are also distributors. I think there's about 176 or so. So those kind of levels are quite big, and they really need attention. And it's also important, I guess, at this point to also mention that the data that we have, or at least the data that I'm sharing with you now, is only data of systems that are registered. So almost every other country that we've worked with, there are people that are struggling with systems that have not yet been registered. And the effect on, for example, the utilities financials, as we'll discuss, of a registered system and an unregistered system is pretty much similar. So it's very important that utilities get to know what's going on within their grids in terms of registered systems and unregistered systems. So let's speak or have a short discussion on the typical costs of distribution utilities. Those percentages here are from the work that we have done and things that we have seen. They're by no means a reflection of a very specific distribution utility. So yours might be slightly different, but all of them take a very similar shape. The costs of a distribution utility can be divided largely into two. So you have your fixed costs and also your variable costs. Your variable costs consist of your electricity bulk supply. So these are the kilowatt hours that as a disco you would buy from a generator, and then you would sell those kilowatt hours to your customers. On the fixed side of things, we have your salaries, your repairs, your capital charges. Then you have your other costs such as your licenses that you may need to pay to the regulator, etc. So what's important to show here, maybe before we get to this other slide, what's important to show here or to note is that these fixed costs that you see here are not really that much dependent on the amount of kilowatt hours that you sell. So even if you sold nothing for that month, this fixed cost will roughly remain the same. Hence, they are fixed costs. So that's important to keep in mind. So if you go to the next slide, we'll look at the typical historic cost recovery of distribution utilities. The utilities in the past, and some still do it today, especially on the domestic and the small commercial categories, they recover these charges through an energy charge. And this becomes a big challenge because with decreasing consumption due to DERs, less of those costs can be recovered. And so a natural response to recover the costs is to increase the cost per kilowatt hour. And then this leads to reverse cross-subsidization, where those without DERs disproportionately, okay, I think, show what pretty much happened there. Let me do this once more. All right, can you confirm, Kino, if you see the screen share?
Yes.
All
I can
right.
see.
Okay. All right. So as I was saying, when you recover those fixed charges and also your variable charges through a single charge, the challenge is when people install DERs, then they tend to consume less from the grid. So with a reduced consumption from the grid, you then get to pay, you then get to you are not able to recover all your costs in the right way. And so then the challenge with that is then you'll be forced to increase the cost per kilowatt hour for those who are still remaining and dependent on the grid. And the further challenge is that most of the people cannot afford distributed energy generation are people who are like on the low income class, and then you have to increase your kilowatt hour recovery from those people, resulting in reverse cross-subsidization, where those without DERs start to subsidize those with DERs. And that becomes a big challenge for utilities because they cannot recover their costs so easily. So in brief, the role of the regulator then in such a scenario is twofold. On the left, the regulator exists to ensure that the conditions are fair for utilities to exist as a going concern. What that simply means is the regulator must ensure that the regulation allows utilities to recover enough from customers in order to sustain themselves and to further develop the network. On the other side, the regulator also is sort of like the referee, right? The middleman. They need to ensure that the value that is provided by distributed energy resources is fairly captured by the utilities and is also fairly compensated for by the utilities. I think we'll delve in the panel discussion more into how then the regulator is able to sort of straddle those two. And then at a glance, DER regulation, at least 20 or so African countries have either published regulatory rules, or they have draft rules, or they have functional pilots that speak to embedded generation. The countries that you see that are in light blue, they have regulatory rules that are under development through the Get Transform sponsored or partner DG Policy Catalyst Window Program. So this is really good, but it can also be better, where more African countries can develop some rules in order to ensure that there's a fair and level playing field for both the utilities and the customers in the age of growing DERs. So the existing rules as well may need to be revised to actually fully capture the value from DERs. So the existence of the rules does not necessarily mean that they are perfect, but they point to an acknowledgement of an occurring phenomena, which needs then to be tackled much more properly with revisions and with learnings through also webinars and courses and programs such as we have now, in terms of updating our regulations and making sure that they are future ready. All right, so that brings us to the end of our, hopefully what was a short presentation. And the idea is to get us to understand what is going on the ground, to say that we cannot ignore further distributed energy resources. They are happening and they are independent of policy. They'll happen because the prices are getting cheaper and because people want more reliable power. We'll have to play catch up, because then if we don't, our utilities are going to suffer in the ways that have been spoken about. So at this point, I'll hand back over to Kino, who is going to usher us maybe into the next phase of discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zebusisi, for setting the scene so clearly. And we will now see if the utilities can survive or thrive in this scenario that you have depicted very clearly. So let me now introduce our panelists for today's discussion. First, we are joined by Professor Nasio, Senior Advisor to the ESA. As we all know, Prof is a leading authority on power sector regulation, market design, with long-standing experience advising multiple regulators and governments on utility reform, tariffs, system governance. He will help us step back and examine how the role of the utility is changing in systems with growing DERs. So, Prof, welcome. We will also have Dr. Charlie Gatete from the ESR. He is also a seasoned expert on power sector regulation, utility reform, and other related topics. And we are very, very grateful again to have Dr. Charlie Gatete, a senior researcher at the African School of Regulation. Prof, would you like to say something?
Well, yes, thank you, Keno. I will say something, but I think that the right panelist in this session will be our colleague, Charlie Gatete. So yes, the life will become, as has been just said, more complex for utilities. The demand will not be passive. There will be much more interaction, more costs, more complexity, less energy being supplied. Very recently, we are listening about data centers that want to connect to the medium voltage in the distribution grid, and then there will be new roles and more complexity there, and probably the role of the distribution system operator that was more passive. Now it will become much more interesting. But I wanted just to say something, and then I will pass the word to Charlie. And is that when we talk about capturing the value of DRs, typically we think of the energy that they could export. So solar panels, at certain times of the day, when they produce more than the demand in the household, then they are exporting power. And all the discussion about net metering and all that has been about how to value that energy and how to compensate for the effect that Subsidio has been presenting. And I think it is very clear from the slides that he presented that there is more than what the value of what is exported. It is the value of what is cancelled inside the household. But my point is that maybe the question or the question that matters much to me, because this is the future, is not that much the future of the utility, but the future of the provision of electricity. And what we see is that it is not only energy what could be provided by solar panels and in general distributed resources with batteries, smart thermostats. It is that there are other services that can be provided in a distributed way. So it is possible to delay, to postpone investment in transmission or distribution because we are able to reduce the peak demand in certain feeders or certain substations if we are able to discharge batteries or to modify the demand with flexible demand and smart controllers. We could aggregate in the response of many households with an aggregator, and this is happening, that is taking place in some countries already. It is possible to control the frequency, to damp oscillations in frequency. It is possible to smooth out the ramps that take place when the sun rises, for instance, and or sets. So there, we could provide ancillary services. We could provide operating reserves with distributed resources. So all these services that have been provided by the vertically integrated utility all the time now could be provided by different agents, and therefore we have to stop thinking of the utility as the only provider. There will be multiple providers, and we will have to put value to each one of these services so that we could remunerate them properly. And that will be the major challenge, I think, of the next decade and into the future. And with that, I will stop my participation and I pass the word to my colleague, Charlie. Thank you, Keno.
All right. Thank you, Prof,
Thank you,
for
Prof.
that comment. I will now introduce my other panelist, Mr. Ruben Okoye from Nigeria. Mr. Ruben is a highly regarded legal and regulatory expert in the Nigerian electricity sector. He is currently a commissioner in the Enugu State Electricity Regulatory Commission in Nigeria. He brings a regulatory perspective from one of Africa's largest electricity systems, where utilities face financial pressure alongside rapid growth in distributed generation. And in fact, in DERs. His experience grounds this discussion in institutional and regulatory reality. Of course, my other panelist is Mr. Zibusiso Ndlovu, from whom we have just heard. He is energy advisor and senior project coordinator at Sustainable Energy Africa. He specializes in capacity building for utilities and regulators in the development of distributed generation tariffs across sub-Saharan Africa. And he brings to this discussion an applied perspective, as we have just seen from his presentation, from his work across utilities and regulators on these DER systems. Let us now turn to the panel discussion. I will have questions on the changing role of the utility, which Prof has just touched upon. And then we will move through issues of financial sustainability, tariffs and fairness, institutional readiness, and finally, the long-term direction of the sector. I encourage panelists to share their experience candidly, and I also encourage our participants to share questions and comments through the chat as we go along. So I will start my first question with Dr. Charlie, and then I will ask Mr. Ruben to also comment upon that. So let's go back to the basics from what we also have heard from Prof. I think we need to know what we actually mean by a utility in a system with growing distributed energy resources in the system in general. So in a system where generation, storage, flexibility can, not only can, also are also coming from distributed actors. Dr. Charlie, how should we define a utility? Is it a service provider, platform operator, market enabler? What is a utility? And based on your comment, I will ask Mr. Ruben to reflect upon what that, let's say, new definition of a utility would mean from regulatory perspective. So Dr. Charlie and then Mr. Ruben. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Keno. In fact, this is a very good question, given that the current situation of the penetration of GR need to rethink what is a utility. But let me start by the beginning. In most African power system, the electricity is still a system backbone, typically a state-owner entity. So can be construction that combine some kind of function. First function is to be a single buyer of taker for IPP. Other function of utility that we know is mainly a network operator, so to run distribution and sometimes transmission, plan expansion, connect customers. The third function is retail supplier, so to build and collect from end user, consumer, manage consumer services and losses. And the last one, but not the least, is a kind of sector shock absorber. That means to carry quasi-fiscal burden then when tariff collection and subsidy cannot cover the costs. So this is what we are used to in terms of utility. But from this situation now, the question should be how utilities are changing their role as African power sector evolve. Yeah. And this one we can observe now from that from the presentation, but also from Prof comment, that now utility have to move. We are moving from commodity seller to a platform operator. That's first. That means, in fact, based on what we have in terms of distributed energy resources, the penetration of DIA, solar home system, solar plus storage, AV charging, they push utility towards a platform role. So monthly to procure some services to DIA. That is the first move. So utilities are moving now from this community seller to a platform operator. The second one that I want to emphasize is that there is a move also on from energy delivering to a flexibility management. What does it mean? With penetration of DER and variable renewable, we can see that in the grid, utility and system operator must secure flexibility, fast response, supply, storage, demand response, have reserve. So they need to secure that flexibility to keep reliability and reduce curtailment in the system. That is the second move that is important to highlight. And they should provide for that new operational product. Prof mentioned ancillary service, balancing service, frequency control, congestion, other service that they have to consider. The third move that I want to highlight here is that, utilities have to move from national silos to regional market participants. What does it mean? With the development of regional power of trade in Africa, having good achievement, we have good achievement with SAP, WAP, for instance, utility need to develop new competencies in scheduling, settlement, different trade, power trade, credit, collateral management. They need also to contribute on cross-border outage coordination, operational platform, but also contracting. So these three changes is something that utilities now have to face. And I mean, in addition to that, they need to enhance their performance and service delivery to address that new challenge. And to be also, this another point is to be also to build smarter, that to consider the digitalization. So there's a new development in terms of IT that they should consider. So to conclude on this first question, I mean, utility now are facing a urgent challenge regarding the penetration. And in front of that, they require to adapt their operation. They have to adapt their operation. They have to increase what they can provide to the grid, but also to new member of the market, that is DIA owner and prosumer. And for that, for this new operation they have to provide, it's important for them to adjust what they can do, but also is important as a School of Regulation, it's important to highlight also for regulator, that regulator have to address this new development, this new area by some regulation. That's considered the creation of DIA, regulation on metering, regulation that also contribute to address the question regarding regional market and so on. So what I want to finally say is that utility have to change to address those new challenges, but also regulator have to address with those with some regulation. Over to you, Ken.
Thank you, Dr. Charlie. Mr. Ruben, how does this resonate with your experience in Nigeria? And what does it mean also from the regulatory perspective? Mr. Ruben, can you hear us? All right, I think he's having some issues with network. So let me move to my second question. So if the role of the utility is changing this way, as Dr. Charlie has just briefly described and also as Prof has mentioned, the next question is whether utilities can remain financially sustainable. So the question is, do DERs risk worsening existing financial pressure, or can they support utility sustainability if properly integrated? And under what regulatory or business conditions can utilities treat DERs as their partners, but not as their competitors? I would like Zivosisu to shed light on these issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kino. That is quite a loaded question. So maybe just allow me to break it down and then answer it in phases so that I don't lose anything. So the first part is, do DRs risk worsening the existing financial pressure? I think the risk is always there. The risk is something that we cannot wish away at all, even if we wanted. Because the dynamism that is brought in by DRs when it is mapped onto the traditional business model of a utility, then the financial status of the utility is bound to worsen if nothing is done in how the utility approaches its business. So maybe, I think I touched on this in the presentation, but in brief, what do the traditional financial models look like? So the context is slightly different between each of the utilities across the continent, but there are a few common threads for the traditional financial model. I think the first is bundled tariffs, where all costs are recovered in energy charges, especially in residential and in small commercial tariff groups. And then the second common thread is that there is a markup on energy, or there's a markup in kilowatt hours for distribution companies, where whatever they buy from their generators, then they put, for example, let's say a 15% per kilowatt hour and on sell that to the customer. And the third common thread is that there are unmapped cross subsidies and unmapped subsidies. So everyone knows that there are cross subsidies and everyone knows that someone is being subsidized, but no one can speak with concrete terms as to who is being subsidized and how many people we have, and thoroughly what's the number of households and how many kilowatt hours roughly a year are we using in subsidizing specific people within the customer classes or customer categories. So in that kind of like traditional model, if the dynamism that DERs bring it being a service provider, also drawing people away from getting kilowatt hours from the grid, is definitely going to ensure that utilities' financial situation worsens. So at what point then, to the second part of your question, at what point then or under what regulatory or business conditions can utilities treat DERs as partners, right? DERs can become a support to the utility if they are properly integrated. And then the question that's interesting is, what does proper integration mean? So in brief, DERs become partners to the utility when energy costs, which are your kilowatt hours, are a pass-through cost, where the utility business model is not dependent at all on the kilowatt units that are sold. So in this particular instance then, even when people move away from the grid, there are still charges that enable the utility to recover all of the costs that it needs to meet its fixed costs and to also ensure that it goes on as a viable entity, which means investment into the future, investment in the expansion of the grid, and also the refurbishment and upkeep of the current grid infrastructure. So by moving away from basing all our income on kilowatt hours sold, and by mapping in clear known terms through thorough cost of supply studies, what it costs us to actually deliver this unit kilowatt hour to a customer, we're able to structure our charges such that we'll be able to make sure that our utility doesn't suffer even when there's a high penetration of distributed energy resources. So it all starts with knowing who is being subsidized. I mean, this is an additional point, that we need to know who is subsidized. And when we speak of cross subsidies, they must also be in clear policy terms where we know exactly how much, and we're quite intentional in how we do it. This will also then influence how much we charge other classes in order to meet these cross subsidies, instead of people just falling through the cracks or us just knowing that we're subsidizing them without that kind of data. So under those conditions where kilowatt hours are a pass-through cost, and we know exactly what it costs us to deliver a kilowatt hour, and we're able to recover that through demand charges and through fixed charges, at that point, then can DRs become a partner to the utility and not necessarily competition. And also in a space where we can equitably also reward people who feed electricity back into the grid, and people who ensure that we defer investment. At that point, then I think that's the starting picture where we can see the partnership between DERs and also the utility.
Thank you very much, Sibusiso. I think we have Mr. Ruben. Yes. So let me all right. Let me reframe the question for you so that you may
Thank you.
respond to it. Yeah. So the discussion that Sibusiso has brought about financial pressure brings us directly to tariffs because this is where costs, revenues, and fairness ultimately meet. And I think this is where regulators such as yourself often face the hardest trade-offs. How should tariff and remuneration frameworks evolve to remain fair, transparent, and financially sustainable in such a system where there are significant penetrations of ARs in the system, so that prosumers and fully grid-dependent customers are fairly treated? And how should costs and benefits be allocated? And what role should regulators play in managing this balance? So again, is a set of questions that I'm sure you can unpack it as well and give us some insights, Mr. Ruben.
Thank you so much, Kenu. I'm very sorry my network caused me a lot of issues, but I'm back now. So please forgive me. Now on the issue of tariffs, like Ndlovu, the name that easily comes to my mouth is Ndlovu. The first name, I can't get it very easily. So like you said, the regulator is the middleman, the referee who should make sure that the value the prosumers bring is recognized, and that the utility is enabled to stay in business and recover its reasonable costs. So in ensuring that this happens in the world of disruptive technology, where there's proliferating and taking on the utility and almost running the utility out of business, it is necessary that in protecting the utility, a recognition must be made that even the prosumers, they need the grid. They need the grid because either they need it as a backup, or they need it when the bad days come, when the weather goes very bad and there's the solar does not work, or there's a storm or whatever. They will need the grid. So there should be a recognition that there are network costs that should be borne also by the prosumers, Now, whether they should be charged more or less, my view is that they should not be charged as high, but there should be that recognition that they should pay something, because otherwise the captive customers will be subsidizing them. They will be bearing all the costs of the network, and the prosumers are taking all the benefits. So I think that there is that fairness for the utility, that those costs should be recognized, and they should be able to collect that by way of whether you call it a fixed charge or whatever. That is one. Then for the prosumer, the value it brings should be recognized. And like Prof has said, it is not just energy that the prosumer brings in different forms. There's the balancing that they bring and all of that. So that should be recognized in the tariff. I also think that in the tariff, of course, the time of use tariff should also recognize that the man that has the solar panel on the roof, they generate power in the daytime when power is probably cheaper, but they consume more in the night. And so time of use becomes necessary for the utility to be able to recover adequately from the market. And I think that at the end of the day, the utility is necessary for the prosumer to do many of the things it wants to do. For it to be able to export power into the grid, it needs the grid to be alive and well. If the grid is not working, it cannot do that. So that's in summary what I would say about tariff recovery for both the utility and the prosumers.
Thank you, Mr. Ruben, on that. But I would like to ask Zibosisu and again Mr. Ruben, if there are some practical examples that you can give us in Africa, of course, where these are recognized. The benefits and the impacts of DERs are already recognized in the tariffs. Do we have such examples?
Sorry, Kino, could you please repeat that question once more?
Yes. Do we have practical examples? Yes, in any African country where in the tariff they have recognized the impacts and the benefits of DERs so that the tariffs remain fair. If there are any practical examples, yeah.
Thank you for that, Kino. I think the others will also contribute as well onto this. Colleagues can do so on the chat. So far, what we see in most African countries that have tariffs that sort of are aligning is that it's developing in steps. I think to go from zero recognition to full recognition is quite a jump. I think there's going to be lots of shocks to the prosumers as well, and also to the larger customer base. So it's a step-by-step basis. But we see countries that are doing fairly well. For example, in Namibia, where most, if not all of the of the categories that have people that are on DERs have like unbundled tariffs, at least on the side wherein they can pay for their fair share of fixed costs. And also they have as well a remuneration to the DERs, but only at an energy level. So what we have not seen yet is a one-to-one remuneration rate in terms of kilowatt hours, and also other forms of remuneration outside of paying for the energy. But I believe that as the story gets clearer, as our understanding gets clearer, and also as the data starts to build up, we are sure going to see such. But I think it's happening step by step, where people are being compensated a percentage of maybe the kilowatt hour value that they get sold to. And on the other side, they are paying as well their fair share of fixed costs and also for demand charges.
Thank you very much, Sibosiso, for that. I do have a question in the chat box. So let me read it as it is, and any of you may take. Many developed countries, including Germany, who encouraged and achieved a lot of DER and IPPs, have a lot of challenge with their electrical cells, which is very expensive. How can we learn from their mistakes? And what should African countries do differently to achieve a more favorable outcome, especially on the financial side? This is a question we have in the chat box, rather in the Q&A box. Mr. Ruben, would you like to take this? What can we learn from other jurisdictions who have gone the same path and made mistakes as African regulators?
I would say that we need to make progress a little slowly because in Africa, the situation is different. In Nigeria, especially, the distribution companies are in sore distress. They can't service most of the corporates, the industrials. Most of them are either on self-generation or they have some embedded generation arrangements and so on and so forth. So we find a situation where we can't move too rapidly because the discos are in a very weak situation. We have a situation in Nigeria where about 50% or more of the customers are not metered. Many of these solutions require smart metering, employment of technology, and all of that. In our transmission, we're still doing transmission without SCADA. And I read a recent report from the national regulator about the situation of the Nigerian system operator. And it was very it was like flying an aeroplane blind. So we have that kind of situation. So we need to navigate around power delivery in our country for customers. Get power that is usable to the customers. And from there we can build. I believe that when we manage those basic things, we can now get into the more complex arrangements that they have in Europe and the rest of the world.
All right, thank you, Mr. Ruben, on that. Let's now move from tariffs and towards institutional readiness of especially African regulators. Technology is moving faster than institutions, as we have also seen from the presentation. So what institutional gaps do you see today among African regulators, utilities, and system operators when it comes to DER integration? And which reforms or capabilities are most urgent to prioritize? Yeah, so what gaps do you see and how should we prioritize? I will start with, again, with Mr. Ruben, and then Dr. Charlie, and finally, Zipu Siso. Thank you.
So that I don't sound like a broken record, we have institutional issues. We have, for example, very weak grid. It's not a secret that January alone, where the country has had two major grid collapses, and the number just goes up. I read a recent report that between 2016 to 2025, more than 200 grid collapses. So the nature of the grid is so weak that I don't know of any prosumer that will want to generate into a grid. Meanwhile, the reason why I've had difficulties with my network has been that we don't have power. We have not had power since last night. So if you were to generate into the local grid here, and it's been off for the past almost, should I say, 18 hours, I think your business will fail. So we have weak network. We have low adaptation of technology. I talked about what is it? The system operation in Nigeria where there is no SCADA and there is no distribution company in Nigeria network. And you talk about basic things like I mentioned before, we talk about low levels of metering. It is very sad, but in my country, we have more than 50% on estimated way you can convert an estimated bill into an exact science. So the basic thing is to just get a meter. So we are struggling with such things as getting a meter for customers. So we have very serious situation for the distribution companies, the utilities, because most of the customers who are able to pay their bills comfortably are exiting from the grid. The corporates, the industrials, and so on have left the grid. And then so you find that the less enabled customers are trapped in our grid. And I don't know whether Nigeria typifies the classical case of the death spiral of the disco, because all that the disco wants is increase the tariff. Meanwhile, people are leaving the grid. People are taking care of themselves with all kinds of arrangements, including buying generator sets, polluting the environment, nevertheless, but it is better than being in darkness. So these are some of the, of course, I also need to talk about regulatory capability. During time of use tariff and all of that requires some level of sophistication, and across board, I don't think that we have that level of capacity very prevalent in the regulatory bodies. Talk about Nigeria and maybe other parts of Africa. So these are some of the institutional readiness issues that we need to overcome, for proper integration and adoption of theirs in the network.
Thank you, Mr. Reuben. Dr. Charlie, would you like to add to that?
Yes, please. If I may add, is that in terms of gap, we can observe we already started talking about it, is in terms of tariff structure. The structure of a tariff that's still is still as a one-way power flow. So many tariffs are heavily volumetric in Africa and cross subsidies. That makes DR look like a revenue loss rather than a system resources. So it is important to consider and value the input of DR on the grid, and then to have reform in terms of regulation to adjust to improve regulation that is already in place or not in place. Regarding the map that my friend Zibusiso presented, there is some countries that have not yet have the regulation. So we need this kind of reform to have more regulation on DR so we can address this issue. And as well, reform in terms of utility mandates. In presence of DR, we need utility to enhance the mandate to consider that they can and they should consider several operations that we have to organize. And then I want perhaps to add another thing that need in attention is regarding the commercial fragility of utilities now. So we have losses, collection, we have several months or years of areas that dominate decision making. So when utility are financial stress, they are perceived as a competitor. Should not be the case. So we should work closely on reform that address and know that and show that DIA is not affecting, it should not affect the commercial fragility of utilities, but could help also utilities to have a more cash flow. That's a possible investment. Another point, and that is linked to technology, is we have a weak or a poor data or reporting mandate. So without routine and standardized reporting process regarding losses, regarding outages, regarding connection queues and voltages control, regulator can't credibly run performance-based regulation or handle DIA dispute in case. So utility performance data and transparency remain a central constraint and the issue in terms of institutional issue that should be addressed. And we need to address that with a strong data system, regulatory tools, but also coordination mechanisms. And on our point of view, this is a priority now, is to have to address those kind of data and reporting mandate that is important to tackle this question of DA. That's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Charlie. We do have a question again in the Q&A box. Let me read it. And it's also related to institutional capacity. Utilities are struggling with reduced sales due to DER, and they need to adjust their tariffs accordingly. However, some of the utilities, for example, Eskom in South Africa, is highly ineffective and wasting a lot of money and or have a lot of non-paying or stolen electricity. How should the latter be managed better or regulated while not forgetting about the DER customers or those that will come soon? Let me give this to Zikusiso and then to Mr. Ruben, as it is also related to the case he described in Nigeria. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charlie. I think that's a really good question, and I think it's the lived reality of most utilities in Africa. So I think it's good to also separate the issues when we approach this one. There would be the challenges that the utility will struggle with when DR comes online. It does not find utilities ready. And then there are also separate challenges, which are issues of non-paying customers or larger parts of the population being indigent customers, and also the issues of stolen electricity. So both of these issues need to be treated separately because the solution is not for them combined, but it's for them separately. The way in which you resolve, for example, say stolen electricity issues might not be the same way when you resolve the threat of DERs coming online. So I think largely on the part of DERs coming online, what the utility at least needs to do, which I think is fundamental, is to always ensure that just like the other customers would contribute towards recovering network costs, those who are coming in to have, for example, let's say DERs must also cover the same costs. In an instance where a utility might not have split its costs, say into fixed demand and energy charges, it needs to start doing so. I think the path to getting there might be a progressive one to not cause shock and then have people defect from the grid completely, or then to have protests in maybe say countries where protesting is, a legitimate way of implementing change. So then I'd advise that utilities would then approach this step by step, start by phasing it in. I think we've seen the city of Cape Town do that, where they've phased in fixed charges even for like residential customers, right? So I think that step by step would help. Then everyone who is within that customer base starts to bear the burden of stolen electricity or non-paying customers. This kind of burden in the beginning, there needs to be borne by everyone because there is a fault within the system, right? Then the utility can focus on how do we ensure that non-paying customers are served properly or they also pay. That will be the utility looking at, for example, like electricity collection, disconnection of people who are non-paying, or also speaking to other, arms, for example, of government, such as, I don't know, let's say the National Treasury, for example, to look into subsidizing if there's a large section of indigent customers. I think I spoke in my presentation about us having to know who exactly cannot afford. So I think having that data sort of like makes the situation better and can allow utilities to be able to make a case if there needs to be subsidies from certain arms of government or certain social departments within the country, then that data is there. But I think the bottom line is these issues need to be separated because then they are addressed quite differently. When DRs come online, you need to treat customers who have DRs exactly the same as other customers. Then you need to make sure that everyone is actually paying what is a fair share. When it comes then to people that have stolen electricity, you might need to get in other arms, for example, of government to come and assist perhaps in that kind of scenario. But the system will be broken in more than one place. And I think it will be good to sort of like mend those breaks one at a time without trying to have one blanket solution for each and everything. I think those are my thoughts, but happy for the colleagues as well to add their thoughts to the chat as well.
Thank you for
Thank
that,
you.
Mr. Ruben.
Yeah, thank you so much. So there's a lot that the regulator needs to do to help the utility. And for example, in Nigeria, you have regulations on unlawful access to electricity and the rest of them. But I also think that the utility has also a duty beyond looking up to regulation to solve all the problems. There are certain things the regulation and laws and rules will do for the utility, but in the face of competition, in the face of disruptive innovation that is cascading into the power sector, it is not safe for utilities to believe that the only answer is go to the regulator, ask for a higher tariff. They are stealing energy, therefore my loss is high, giving higher tariff. I can't collect enough because my metered customers are not paying enough. Give me higher tariff. The more we do this, the more you give incentive for the defection from the grid. And so American case law has shown us that when the utility loses business as a result of competing forces, no law, no regulation can get it back for you. So you need to do like in Nigeria, like I keep talking about, after 12 years of privatization, I think with the issue of as basic as is give us higher tariff. As we get higher tariff, as more people exit the grid, you will continue until you come to burst. There's a funny case I saw recently of the Market Street Railway in America that believed everything was about getting a higher tariff, until they got a situation where they and the Supreme Court told them, we can't help you. You can't be in business because the competition has moved to help the utility, but the utility has a much bigger duty to make sure that in the face of competition, things are coming, innovation is coming, disruptive innovations are coming, you need to do a lot more to hold your customers. For example, don't resist bears. Use them as
Hello, Mr. Ruben.
opportunities. You have a network which you are a monopoly. You have the wires. Sorry. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Hello? Oh, sorry. All right. So I'm saying that the utility has a comparative advantage as a monopoly that owns wires. And on that platform, it can do a lot of coordination and what is it? Coordination essentially for the prosumers that are on the network, whether they're exporting or whatever, they have a duty to manage, coordinate that, and they don't have competition in that area. So the areas of their advantage, they should explore it and not depend on just increasing tariff. That's basically what I'm trying to say.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Ruben. So let us end now by looking forward and pulling these threads together that we were discussing regarding financial pressure, tariffs, institutional readiness, and especially what regulators should be careful not to do. What would a successful transition to a decentralized electricity system look like in the African context? One that is fair, reliable, and financially sound. In one sentence, how would you describe the future of the utility? Let me start with Sibusiso and then Dr. Charlie, and finally, Mr. Ruben.
Okay, so in one sentence, how would I describe the utility of the future? I think the utility of the future is one that will be able to continue providing services, especially to its most vulnerable customers, and that utility will be financially sustainable, while at the same time compensating in a fair way people that add value within that utility in very quantifiable mechanisms. I think ideally, where all the numbers are clear and there's no guesswork and the utility knows exactly what value is being added, that for me would be the utility of the future that I would like to see.
Thank you very much. Dr. Charlie.
Yes, thank you, Keno, for the same question. I would say, actually, the future is a financial viable network and service platform that manage central and distributed resources, providing flexibility and reliability as products, and also delivering measurable outcome in terms of access, in terms of affordability, and in terms of quality in the under incentive-based regulation. That will be my description. Thank you. Over to you, Ken.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Ruben.
Thank you so much. So, expanding on what I said previously, the utility has comparative advantage on the wires. It owns the wires, it owns the infrastructure. And so it has an unbeatable business in that direction. In my state, my name of my state is Enugu State. We have an energy policy, and one of the things it provides on the market design is that the utility will gradually migrate to a wireless business. where it has control of the wires, and then the retail side of things can be handled by retailers and the rest of them. And we followed that up. We made an order on open access, and then we have a model that will enable different players to use their network. I think that in that area, they have no competition. They will have competition in the provision of electrons, because prosumers will be there, battery and all of that, they are there. There's competition. But in that location, in that coordination area where they become more like a minimum system operator, they have monopoly. So I think that the future is one that still allows them to sell energy, sell units, but their business model is not founded entirely on the number of units they sell, but also on value-added services that they can provide. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before we close, we do have one question from the attendants. Let me read it. The utility in Kenya recently reported interim financial performance, yet Kenya still faces curtailment on set load shedding and still lacks mature net metering frameworks compared to what they have in South Africa and Namibia. With demand pressure rising, how can regulators stand in the policy gap that balances the need for increased generation with the growth of DERs, all while safeguarding financial stability, ensuring they can viably access energy targeted financing? It is not to a specific panelist, so anyone can take that.
Okay, I'll just give a thought, and then maybe Mr. Okoye can come in as a living regulator. I think he'll have more direct experience to that. But I'll say to the question that I don't have a silver bullet answer that solves everything. I think if it was as that simple, then probably the utility in Kenya will be doing amazingly well and we wouldn't have this question. But I think it starts with us as the regulators understanding the role that we need to play, that is to balance and create a space wherein utilities can be financially viable. If the utility is going to look, for example, at financing in order to improve energy access into the future, then the utility needs to be a financially viable, the utility needs to be a going concern in order to be able to borrow money. And largely the income, or at least the surplus of the utility, comes from the customers themselves. So I think in terms of the growth of DER aspects, which is what I want to isolate because there might be other challenges that maybe the utility faces, when it comes to the DER and its contribution towards the utility being financially viable, us as a regulator need to ensure by every means that everyone pays to the utility. And I think it boils down to the utility death spiral that I started. So I'd advise that the utility must mandate that the regulator, actually, probably it's already doing this, but it ought to mandate that the utility carry out a very detailed cost of supply study. So I'm not really certain how the situation is maybe in Kenya, but in other African countries, then the utility is the one that decides what maybe the surplus of the utility would be or what its rate of return would be. So to give the utility a rate of return that ensures that it is financially viable. Once that cost of supply is quite detailed and there are numbers on the screen, then you would know how much people who will put on DRs need to contribute back in terms of tariffs that have been developed according to the clear knowledge garnered or provided by the cost of supply. This ensures then that no one does not pay to the utility for services that are being rendered. And if this is being followed, together with other mechanisms such as debt collection, for example, or the cutting of power to non-paying customers, the utility is going to recover, at least in theory, all of its costs. That already should set the utility on a path to being able to sell itself as a viable institution in order to source financing and also in order to source grounding, but also those kind of that kind of return or that kind of surplus will enable the utility to now focus on refurbishing its grid to minimize power cuts, or if it's a vertically integrated utility, to also boost its own generation, or to invest maybe in other forms of generation, such as wind or solar, etc. But I think the very bottom of it starts with knowing exactly how much we need to keep going. And that starts from a cost of supply. And it is the regulator who can sort of like push and mandate that and monitor that and make sure that at least we have that start.
Thank you very much. As we're running out of time, I will take this final question from Stella. So in addition to the question from Kenya, they say, we do not have a legal framework for allowing open access to the distribution network. So what is the situation in Nigeria, Mr. Ruben, regarding network access, distribution network access?
Okay, so I mentioned the electricity policy of the state. It clearly indicates that it's a matter of law that there should be open access, third-party access, to the distribution network. And following that, we had to come up with an order that mandates the utility to open its network to third parties under a distribution use of system charges. We have a model that ensures that the utility does not lose money by allowing third parties into its network. But where you have redundant networks, where you have networks that are broken down, and you have customers or power takers that would like to use that network, we have the legal backing to do that, and we've done that. It's actually on our website, so that and third parties are already trying to explore that opening, that you don't have to, the distribution company doesn't have to do everything by itself. Others can do that. They can enter arrangements to reinforce their network and then get power to where it is needed. And we consulted widely. We consulted with the utility. We consulted with the other stakeholders. This is what we want to do, backed by our law, and we have done that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ruben. And thank you very much. Okay, all right, please.
Kino,
please.
Anna, just maybe we might not be able to do a back and forth on that question with Stella, but I wanted to find out in what sense, at least for this question, is it in the sense of like distributed generation, or is it for maybe in the IPP sense also, where you would consider things such as wheeling? Because the net metering rules of Kenya are published in 2024. I'm just going to read here. It does say that a licensee shall enter into a net metering agreement with consumers on a first come, first serve and non-discriminatory basis, subject to the provisions of these regulations. So I think in Kenya, as far as DG or DRs are concerned, which are for own consumption, then anyone can access the grid because the utility cannot discriminate as per these provisions. But maybe this becomes different when you speak of maybe IPPs or maybe, let's say, generation that falls outside the scope of net metering, so to speak.
Thank you, Zibusiso, for that intervention. And Titus has also commented the same thing as you said. Kenya has operationalized access to the distribution networks through its Energy Act of 2019. So it means the network access issue has been resolved since 2019. So with that, thank you very much to all our panelists for a thoughtful and grounded discussion, and thank you all our participants for the questions and for the comments that you've shared through the chat and Q&A functionalities of Zoom. So let me briefly summarize what we've discussed. Number one, distributed energy resources are no longer a marginal issue. They are already shaping how electricity is produced, consumed, and paid for. And therefore, regulation has to respond to that reality rather than react to it later, as we have also seen from the presentation. Number two, the discussion has shown that the challenge is also institutional and regulatory, as we have also heard from the experience of Nigeria. How tariffs are designed, how costs are allocated, and how utilities are incentivized will largely determine whether DERs will strengthen or weaken the power system, whether the utilities will thrive or not, in other sense. And the third one is that there is a clear tension that regulators must manage carefully. On the one hand, enabling innovation and customer participation, and on the other hand, protecting fairness, cost recovery, and financial sustainability of utilities that remain essential to the system reliability. This discussion is a starting point, and it forms a broader part of analytical and capacity building efforts. Insights from this discussion will feed into future capacity building. On behalf of the ASR, I would like to thank our co-organizer, Sustainable Energy Africa, and our partner, Get Transform, all the speakers for their contributions. And I would also like to thank all our audience, the participants, for taking the time to engage with us. And with that, we will bring this session to a close. Thank you once again, and we look forward to continuing engagement. Thank you.